Hey, my friends, this is Xavier with the Thrive Business Institute and the legendary Leadership Academy. I wanted to bring this blog post to you this week. And this one is, it's interesting. This is an interesting blog post. And so I wanted to talk with you briefly about leadership through loss, or leading through loss. I received a private message here recently, and that was the question. The question was, how do you lead through loss? How do you lead through those tough periods? And, unfortunately here in my hometown, over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of loss. Some friends, people that I grew up with that have passed unexpectedly, very untimely deaths. And even my own son, my youngest son lost his mother just a year ago Labor Day. And it's interesting leading through those moments in a person's life, but I'm familiar with that energy. I'm familiar with that space. My parents passed 2 years apart before I left elementary school. We're coming up on 30 years now of them passing. My grandmother raised me, but yet my grandmother passed not even a month after my youngest daughter was born. I buried my sister in 2009, buried a brother a couple of years ago. So I get it. So I get the energy of having to lead and continue to, whether it's leadership of your family, leadership at a job, leading yourself, leading your business through moments where life happens, right? And so I want to talk to that very briefly today. And hopefully, this video will help someone. So I'll just kind of talk from a space of what worked for me and how I managed it, and how I set those expectations for my family and set those expectations for my businesses and my leadership. So here recently, one of the tougher losses, of course, as I said before, my son lost his mother a little over a year ago right now. And so it was an interesting moment. And so I'll tell you sort of the rules to follow when loss happens, especially if it affects youth, or if it affects, someone that works for you or a family member, how you can continue to excel in your leadership through those tough moments in a person's life. And one of the first things that I did is I allowed the space to grieve. That's one of the reasons that, it's federal law, the Family Medical Leave Act allows an individual time to mourn a lost one, and so one of the things that I did within my own life is I allowed my son that time, that space to grieve. And I think that is important first. The shock of losing someone, it doesn't necessarily hit immediately. Sometimes it does, but normally what will happen is it creates a numbness right in the beginning that you don't really expect. And then, a few days later, and you can't really put a time to it, but moments later, unexpectedly, the realization of loss happens. And sometimes that can be emotionally draining, for the person. And so you have to allow that space for a person to grieve. That is a necessary component of the process. One of the other things that I shared with my son during this time of loss in his life, and something that I accepted myself, is that grieving, and it's kind of cliche-ish, we say grieving is a process, right? But for me, there are moments where I still grieve my parents, and I grieve my sister. I grieve my grandmother, like I grieve my brother, those that I've lost. It's a continuous process, but it's how you grieve, and it's how you continue to move forward. So the first step, as I would say, is establish the idea that grieving is normal, right? And that is okay. Now, what I did share to my son a few days later, and I shared this with some of his teachers, because I kept him out of school for a week to kind of process that on his own. and make sure that I was available there to just give him a place to release. And if he just needed that spare time on his own, I was still in the vicinity to be able to ensure that he was grieving in a healthy manner. Now, of course, if this relates to your employees, there's not much that you can do with that. You can't, you want them to be healthy when they grieve, and you want them to grieve in a healthy manner without any, and when I say healthy, I mean, and that's subjective to a certain degree, but I mean, you're not out drinking, you're not out doing things that destroy you personally. You're grieving. It's just the emotional process. And so I allow that space, that safe place for that to happen. The other thing that I did, or the next step in sort of leading through loss, is you have a conversation with the individual. Now, if it's your children or if it's a family member, of course, these conversations are going to be slightly different from a family member or a child and your employee, or even working with an employer. But one of the things I shared with my son is this. I said, son, my job as a dad is to teach you how to grieve and then take a step. Grieve and take a step forward. And what I was sharing with him is that you still have to move forward. And it's the old cliche that life goes on, but you teach them that grieving is normal, that's going to happen, and it's okay. Create a safe place mentally for a person to grieve, and then let them know that we still have a job to do. These are the priorities that we still have to take care of. And so I shared with my son that, yes, you stayed home for a week. We shared special moments at home. And then I said, but when you go back to school, because that's what we have to do. And I gained agreement that, yes, these are the goals. And yes, life does have to move forward. And I got him saying yes. And I got him nodding, saying, yes, these are things that are important. And these are things that I have to get done. Once you establish the important objectives that need to be done, then you can begin to set parameters on how that grieving takes place at that point. So the example would be, as I shared with my son's teachers, I also shared with him, I said, and losing his mom is huge. However, when he's in your class, I don't want you to feel sorry. I don't want you to give him special treatment. I want life to go on as normal as it can be in that particular setting. And so if he's not on task, I need you to check that. If he's not turning in assignments, I need you to check that. And the same thing would happen if I have an employee that is grieving the loss of, a loved one or a spouse, a significant other, a child, or whatever the case may be. When you're dealing with loss, you allow that space for them to have a moment, right? But when they come back to work, we still set clear expectations of what needs to happen moving forward. So we talk about that. And if they're in a good space to return to work, and as a leader, I'm giving them that space. I'm giving them my ear to talk me through sort of where they are. And then once they vent and once they talk to me about where they are, the same thing that I did with my son, I would do with an employee. And I get them nodding yes, that this is the objective while you are here. Does that make sense? That while they're in your presence or while they're at the workplace, they have to be there and they have to be productive. Now, what you do when you have this conversation is you let them know that we understand that grieving is a process. And if you have a moment, if you find yourself having a moment, because it's going to come, just unannounced, you'll have an emotional rush. You give them the green light to take a moment, right? To go to the bathroom, cry, do whatever it is that you need to do, collect yourself, and then come right back to work, right? We collect ourselves and we move forward. And the way that I explained it to my son is that grief or grieving is like a roller coaster, right? There are times when you'll just be ticking up the hill and you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And then you'll peak out and you'll go over the top and you'll have this moment. You'll go down, and that's just how it goes. That's just how the emotional spectrum goes during the grieving process. So you set those expectations early. So remember, first, we give them the space, the safe place to grieve. That's first. Second, once they're back to work, or they're back to school, or they're back to that activity that looks normal, you begin to explain to them this and gain agreement, right? So part 2 is gaining agreement for what the objective is for them to return to school, to return to work, to return to whatever that is that you need to return to regular life in the house. You set those expectations of what needs to happen. Now, as the leader, it's really up to you to set those expectations. If you are the leader of or you have employees, or you're at the job and you're working through this, it's up to you to be that advocate for your employee, to give them that safe place, to give them an ear to vent and talk through, and also give them green light to have that emotional release when it comes, right? And so you give them that place, that safe place to navigate while they're on the job. Now, once you finish that, and once you set those expectations, you hold them to those expectations, right? And so, and in the beginning, it just takes like riding a bike. They'll learn, they'll come to work, or your kids may have an issue, or you even may have an issue just leading yourself. This is not just for family members, or this is not just for an employee. This is for you. And this is one way that you can navigate through the reality of a loss. First, give yourself permission to grieve. There's no need for you to try to walk around and be tough, right? Give yourself permission. That is a natural component of the human psyche, is going through that grief period. So give yourself permission to do that. Once you do that, then you go into, what does it look like? What does normal look like for me? And so if normal is going back to work, then go back to work. If normal is going back to school, then go back to school. If normal is cooking dinner 5 nights a week, then go back to cooking dinner 5 nights a week. Whatever that normal is for you, go back to that. And once you go back to that, then you'll be in a better place, and you can return to something that looked like normalcy at that point. And give yourself permission to have moments, right? So when you do have a moment, give yourself permission to do that. It's okay, and it is natural to have that. But once you have that moment, let it come, let it go. Don't hold on to it. Let it go, wash your face, and get back to normalcy. Get back to what's normal in life again. That's going to create some great balance for you, and it's going to let you dip down into the valley of emotions, and then it's going to bring you right back up to a level of productivity. But you have to set that stage for yourself if you're the individual that's dealing or trying to lead through loss. You remember, leading through loss, that could be leading yourself, leading a group, leading a group of employees, leading your children, leading your spouse. This is just one of the ways that you can get through that process. And then finally, one of the most important things you do when you're leading through loss, or leading a group, or leading your children, or leading, whoever or wherever, one of the things that I did is I set the expectation, or I set the standard for what the loss means. So this is more personal. This is for my son, and I used his mom passing as a way to set a standard, or to reiterate the standard of living, or reiterate the standard of how you're going to operate every single day. There are individuals that grieve in a very unhealthy manner. They'll use it to go out and abuse drugs or alcohol, or some sort of self depreciating activity, So, but one of the ways that we navigated here in my family, in my home, is I let my son know that everything you do at this point, you do with your mom in mind. It's not using his mom to make him behave correctly, but I use it as a way to help him push through. I told him because he is an athlete, and he goes out and he runs and he wrestles and does like that, and he's a great athlete. He's a great kid. But one of the things I told him is this: it's almost an unfair advantage for those individuals. And I told him about my own story, growing up losing my parents. It was an unfair advantage to the competition as it related to me. I was able to push myself harder. I was able to run faster, kick the ball harder, fight for the result that I wanted, because I was fighting not just for myself, but I was fighting for the remembrance of my parents. And I would walk out and I would say, Mom, I'm doing this for you, or Dad, I'm doing this for you. And it allowed me to remember those strong attributes about my parents, but it gave me that extra, that little bit of extra that I was able to overcome an opponent, or I was able to kick the ball a little bit further. I was able to do things that I shouldn't have really been able to do at that stage in my life. And still to this day, I attribute a lot of my success to those that I've lost over the years, because it continues to push me to be the absolute best version of myself that I can be. And so remember, that last stage is helping either your employees or helping your children or loved ones remember legacy. And what is the legacy that we want to leave? What is the legacy that I want to communicate to my child or to my employee or to myself about someone that I lost? When you remember the legacy of a person, you're able to push through in areas that you normally wouldn't be able to push through. If you look at the children of individuals that had a large impact on our society, example would be Martin Luther King Jr. When he passed, was assassinated, it gave his children the extra push, because there was a legacy already in place. Whether they went into civil rights or not, it didn't necessarily matter. There was a legacy of excellence that was expected of the children. And so it was something that could push them through the hardest times of their life. So I say that, and I hope that you were able to find some value in this blog post, and hopefully this information will assist you at some point, right? And that's my prayer. So once again, this blog was about leading through loss. Right? Leading through loss is, how do you continue to lead individuals, lead, your company, lead your children, lead your house, your spouse, just how to lead through loss. And so my heart goes out to the families that have lost individuals here recently. I've lost, folks that I played sports with growing up, and it's tough, but we understand sort of what that is, and those are things that we simply can't control. And so the best way that we give honor to those that we lost is how we live. That's how we honor those memories, as we live a phenomenal life in memory of those that have went on before us. So, guys, I'm Xavier once again with the Thrive Business Institute and the Legendary Leadership Academy. It's been great talking to you today. If I can help you in any way, please feel free to reach out. Other than that, take care. I'll see you next time.